Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for watching the next part of my show, William Wallace for America. With me today in this interview is Dan Albert. Dan, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Greetings, William Wallace, and thank you for having me on your show.
Well, I tell you what, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you on. When I met you at CPAC, you had some really interesting things, and you gave me a couple books. We were so busy, we didn't get a chance to really talk that much, but we've had some great conversations in the last few weeks, and I
Yes,
just
sir.
wanted to share that with other people. So, hence the reason I wanted to make sure I got you on the show.
Sounds like a plan.
Well, or is it the Albert plan?
Just call me Dan, the man with the plan.
I like that. So you got a book we're going to talk about a little bit here. It's called the Albert Plan, and it's to restore election integrity is the subtitle, and I'm going to have you talk about that for a second. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions afterwards because that's one thing I'm really good at, is asking a lot of questions. But in a minute, I'm going to put a little banner up here for you and show people where they can get your book. So talk to us on how that got started.
Well, I started out, Bill, with a book with broader topics, and it was the Albert Plan to Save America. And one of those topics was restoring election integrity. And so with the 2020 election, I call it the 2020 election farce. That's what it was. So I decided to spin off a book specifically about how to restore election integrity, and in particular to federal elections. If we restore integrity to federal elections, then we can move down to the state and local levels.
So you think it's that easy to start from the top, or or is your plan? Because we're going to go over in a few minutes here the 15 steps that you have to restore election integrity. So, but what was your driving moment? What was your catalyst that really got you started to write this book?
Well, first of all, Bill, I wouldn't say it's easy. It's a simple plan, and it won't be easy. That's guaranteed. And as far as starting at the federal level or the state level, my 3-point plan is all the above. So the leftists have an all the above strategy for election fraud. And we just need to have an all the above strategy for restoring election integrity. And it was the 2020 election. Of course, I saw election integrity problems throughout. Back in 2018, I noticed that in Birmingham, Alabama, they had more people turn out in the Judge Roy Moore race for Senate than there were eligible voters in that particular in Birmingham. And so the Democrats have had free reign to do what they want to do. And they accuse us of racism if we tried to question it, or voter suppression. They have, the old Paul Simon song, 50 ways to leave your lover. The Democrats have 1,000 ways to commit election fraud. And the Republicans are guilty as well, with a lot of.
I've said the same thing, right? But let me say this, Dan, before we really, because we're going to go a little deep into this, but we're going to cover this today. But I'm going to bring you on a whole bunch of different shows to talk about another book that you wrote later. But I really want people to know that your book isn't saying, hey, there's election fraud. Your book is really about a plan to get involved and to do it in a positive way. And of course, the saying is, stop complaining and just start doing something, about it. And your plan is really a way to get more people involved. And you say the same thing I always say is, look, it's not just the Democrats. There's Republicans to blame on this too, but it's up to us, the people, to get involved in our election systems if we ever want to really truly take control of our elections and keep them fair, honest, and accessible. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir. It's a plan to get involved, but more important than that, it's a plan to actually have elections with integrity. There are people that are trying to do things in different states to fix the problems, but they fall short. They're inadequate, and basically, that's what I laid out. I basically look at a problem and devise a solution, and that's what my plan is all about. I get into the instances of fraud and certain things that shouldn't be permitted. There are things that are just ludicrous that we allow to happen. But and like Steve Bannon says, the 2020 election is a wound that will not heal, and we should not stop trying to expose the fraud and trying to uncover everything that happened during that election. But my focus is on actually organizing people to get on the same page and to institute election integrity at the local level, at the state level. As I told you, Louisiana is one of 5 states that has a head start on restoring election integrity because Louisiana and Kentucky and Mississippi and Virginia and New Jersey have all decoupled federal elections from state and local for the most part. So it's easier for you guys to sequester federal elections and make it so that there are no elections that happen within 60 days of the federal election so that people could focus on that election. And it boils down to just 3 ballots of paper ballots that could be counted very quickly.
Well, and it's funny you say that because there's a whole bunch of different plans I've seen to have paper ballots, but what people aren't realizing that others say, well, it's to take too long to count them, but there's another plan to count them, every hour during the election, so you're not counting, you're not counting all the votes at the end. But we're going to talk more about that later. That's a whole another plan. So you got motivated after this last election to write this book, or was there something brewing before the last election? Did you kind of see things before the 2020 election?
Yes, it's been brewing for a couple of decades at least. And as I was seeing the problems we have with our government, I was identifying solutions. We ought to do this, we ought to do that. And I just, at a point, I had the time and the unction to address all of the problems that I saw, put into a book that was first published in 2017, and then I have a 2020 edition. And so I already had the rough concept of how to restore election integrity before I wrote this last book, but I just put more thought into it and addressed all the problems that I could see and came up with a solution that ought to be, Democrats, honest people that speak truth and seek truth, and they're honest, whether they're Democrat, Independent, Republican, or Constitution Party or Libertarian, they should all want to have election integrity, elections that we can trust.
Well, and to your point, I always say it's like that pendulum swings, and right now it might be swinging one way and one side might be cheering that they got their guy, so to speak. But, and but if it swings the other way, there'll be crime. But if you have fair, honest, secure elections, then the people win. We take power away from, a smaller part of one side and a smaller part of the other side, and we give more power and freedom back to the people. So let's go back into your book a little bit. I'm holding it right here, so I'll hold it up a little bit so people can see it. But to get the book, they would go to Freedom Cells, right?
Well, they can go to freedomcells.com, and on the homepage there are links to the books. But the books are on Amazon. They're available at Barnes and Noble. And also, what I came up with for a plan for organizing people and distributing, just organizing and having meetings and getting on the same page, having civil discourse, and also disseminating anything, tools that I create, books that I have, or other patriots have, so that Freedom Cell organization that I have in mind is there on that website, and people can join. And it's kind of in its infancy. And it's ready to go. I've established a Freedom Cell for the U.S., for every state, for every congressional district, and here in South Carolina, I plan to have to launch into populating the Greenville County Freedom Cell, Spartanburg County. Those are both in the 4th district. And
so tell me, go ahead.
And so people would join those groups to be counted. And then it's important that they go to their local precinct and organize others, form a Freedom Cell for their precinct, and that bubbles up to the county. And so that's the essence of the kind of the organizational plan. And part of that, I have what I call founding fathers, Sons of Liberty, Patriots, and Minutemen. And Bill, we need 30 million patriots to get on the same page and function as Minutemen and do more than just vote. So that's the grassroots. And
Is
then
that is
people
that is are those definitions in this book?
they are
Okay.
they're well in the combination of both books. I included a lot of the information from my, the Albert Plan to Save America is sort of the full meal deal, and then the election integrity book I have. The plan for restoring election integrity isn't complicated. It doesn't take a lot of pages, but I have what I call the clamoring and the clamoring part 2, where I take all of the ideas from the mothership, the full meal deal, and then I have sort of a Cliff's Notes version of it, and also have a survey that's a Cliff's Notes version of the plan that people can organize around and have civil discourse, get together and discuss solutions and take action to do something about it.
So talk to me real quick, because I'm looking through your book as we're talking. I'm kind of, so if you see my eyes looking down, I'm kind of thumbing through a lot of things here that sparks a lot of memories from when I was reading through it before, and also in our conversation. But real quick, what is a freedom cell?
A freedom cell is a self-organizing, autonomous group of people that it's decentralized and distributed, so that there's no centralized power calling upon everyone to do certain things. There could be sort of when you see fish in the ocean, a school of fish turning without really, it's not apparent what causes it, but it's a God thing. It's a beautiful thing to watch, and birds that fly in the air and the flock.
I've seen this before, right?
Yes, and we the people are far more intelligent than fish and birds, so we can get on the same page. You can't herd cats, but in terms of having people join freedomcells.com, I just asked them to take a quick look through the 100 question survey, which is a synopsis of the plan. So it's not a survey like when I ran for Congress. I filled out most surveys that people asked me to fill out, and it isn't a waste of time like some people think. And elected officials and candidates fear. They don't want to fill out any surveys, really. So we, the people, can, when I ask people that want to join the site to just look through the survey, and if they can say they agree with 70% of the questions, or
that goes into your other book, though, right?
Yes, and that's I won't go deep into that, but basically by looking at the survey, if they agree with it, or they'll at least try to get there through civil discourse, then they can come on the site and join and participate and meet other people. And like I said, the site it's ready to roll. I need some help technically, to iron out the bugs, but so that's a tool that I've created. And the book's a tool. The cover of the book that's in a postcard is a tool. I bookmarked page 105 with the 15 elements of election integrity.
I've got the bookmark with the postcard there right now. We're gonna start talking about that here in just a minute, but I want to go through some things real quick. It's like when I thumb through the book, this is, what I like about it is this. All too often, people, so many people, I'll say, have gotten to a point they don't want to hear about election integrity. To them, it's old news. It's not happening. It's not going on. I don't want to hear about that. It's over, whatever the case may be. But in reality, and I always tell people, in reality, our real problem is that the complacency of the American public not being involved in our elections in positive ways is part of the problem. I'm not pointing fingers. I get it. Life, we're busy, kids, grandkids, the whole 9 yards. But the reality is, if we don't start finding ways to be involved in a positive way in our elections, and it could be as simple as some of the things you point out. Everyone should vote. Voting should be easy. When you point out some of those things, these are positive steps in this book to get involved and stop complaining. Undermining election integrity, the dirty voter rolls. That's something I've talked about a lot before. People think our elections are fair, but when you look at the voter rolls, we've got a ton of bad registrations in there, which is the reason why you'll see, like you said, in Alabama, when they have more people voting than they do what registered voters. The same thing happened in Wisconsin. They've got where more people voted in their election for the last presidential election than than they have actual eligible people to vote in the state. So, and if it's like a million, I don't know if you heard that piece of information or not, but it's like a million people difference. A million more people, plus or minus, voted in that state than they have eligible voters.
And that's one state. And, William, if we don't have election integrity, we don't have a republic. We're no longer a
Right.
constitutional republic. We're a banana republic. And so, when people question our questioning of election integrity, it's usually out of they're part of the problem, or they're just not aware, or they don't think through
Because, and
things.
also, and I'd like to add to that, interrupt you and add to that, Dan, it's the other part of that is the narratives, because the news media is so loud and so much in our face. The narrative is that the lawsuits are getting turned down because they don't have enough information, or they don't have enough evidence. So that gets all the scholarly people, that gets all the smart people. Wow, if the courts are turning it down, surely, that's our court system. But people are so hearing the narratives so frequently, they're beaten down into submission of saying, look, anything else is just nonsense. Right? Would you?
Oh, absolutely. And if we took every tool that the Democrats use, and like we agree that it's not just Democrats, but it's primarily the leftists, that we're in the midst of a Marxist coup right now, and they have pulled out all the stops. They're lockstep liars, and they have an all the above strategy. And if you take every opportunity they have to commit election fraud or to rig elections, sometimes it's soft fraud, it's soft election rigging. But if you identify, what I've done is like identify as many of those as I can find, and then what I've described as a process that will fix everything. It's like 99.99% of opportunity for fraud will be eliminated. Then, we can look at how that system, that process, will eliminate every specific example of shenanigans that you could possibly think of.
So let's do this. I want to go, because we keep telling everybody about these 15 steps to have good elections, and I can go through some other stuff later. I'll keep looking at your book. Look, I hope people go to your site. We've got it scrolling at the bottom of the video here, with people with freedomcells.com, because when they see your books and it's easy to read, I like how it's broken up into topics, where you give specific definitions on things, and you break it up easy to read. But when they hear the 15 things right now, I think they're going to be motivated to go for your book. But let's talk about this. Can we start with the 15 things?
Well, we can. And I'd like to first say that on the website, freedomcells.com, I have, if you scroll down on the homepage, you'll see both books are there. But below that, somebody could just enter an email address and their name and download a 36-page PDF of the book at no charge. And it's got that, the page 105 has the 15 elements of election integrity. I don't consider them steps; they're elements of election integrity.
Okay.
And so that's a freebie. It's 36 pages and a tool that could help people to get a head start. And they can forward that email to anybody they want to that they think is a like-minded America First patriot.
I love that. I love that plan, Dan. Let's go through this. I'm gonna read them, and we're gonna talk for just a few seconds about each one.
Okay.
Decouple federal elections from state and local elections by prohibiting other elections from being held within 60 days of federal elections. Why is that important?
Well, because the entrenched establishment political class wants to throw everything on the same ballot, so that, number one, it's hard for anybody to be properly informed. So people will vote for people that really don't deserve their vote because they're uninformed about the issues for county council or whatever it is. And so one thing is that by decoupling, you'd improve the information that people have. You'd have more informed voters, and the entrenched establishment political class will hate that. And then the second thing is that they use that ganging up of all these decisions on a single ballot to force us to allow those ballots to be counted by centralized counting centers, 1 million ballots in Maricopa County, let's say. And what in reality, if we decouple, then the federal election is just 3 offices max: Congress, Senate, and President, Vice President. So those could be separated on separate ballots, and then those decisions could be, people could vote, and then those paper ballots would be very easy to sort, and it could all be done at the precinct level. So a lot of the shenanigans happen because these ballots are sent over to highly mechanized counting machines that there are a lot of shenanigans that they can pull, and we could get into all those things. But
yeah, we're going to go deeper later,
yes,
individual.
sir.
I want to do a brief overview right now because I think when people see this, but my, of course, devil advocate here side, it says, won't people get tired of doing multiple elections? But I will say, Louisiana, we do separate our federal from our state. Granted, we have federal elections, and they'll put some local things on the ballot. But to this year we have our statewide elections, so they're already be separated. We'll talk about that more later.
Yes, sir.
Use fingerprints or other biometric means to confirm the legal status of all persons in the United States.
So leading up to having elections with integrity, we need to know what the status is of every person, and we've all been given a God-given way of identifying ourselves. Multiple, thumbprint, fingerprints, a facial scan, an ear scan. I heard is more detailed than a thumbprint, I guess. But so whatever we can do to naturally, use what God gave us instead of implanting a chip or other nefarious things like that.
But I will say this, though, Dan, there's going to be a lot of people, though, that don't want the fingerprint. They don't want their biometrics being used. But I do understand that it's harder to copy it, when you look at that. But you always ask for an ID, right?
Well, I mean, the thumbprint and an ID when you show up to vote. But I start out with identifying, having people identify themselves. They're either a natural born citizen, a naturalized citizen, they're here legally, they're a foreigner here legally, or they're a foreigner here illegally. So by doing that, we're taking the step toward elections with integrity, but also establishing a way to deport the folks that shouldn't be here.
That's actually a really unique plan. So if somebody goes to vote that's not a legal alien, and they put down that thumbprint or use the biometric on the eyes, we can catch them a little bit easier, you're saying.
Well, and before they even go to vote, we need to have a way to, what Biden is doing. And I asked people, was President Biden elected or selected? So
that's unique. Well, let's get to number 3.
Go
okay. Ahead.
Well, I forget.
The
we
bio.
have all these folks coming across that don't belong here, and we have to get serious about, they criticized President Trump when he talked about, certain elements coming over and deporting folks, and they rode that pretty hard. But here we have millions and millions and millions of folks coming across the border, and we have to get serious about how we're going to deal with that problem.
All right. Number 3, require voter registration by congressional district and voting precinct 30 days prior to a federal election.
So if people are forced to register to vote 30 days prior, then people that live in each election jurisdiction would have the opportunity to vet that list, to look for anomalies and for people that are fraudulently on that list, and force the election officials to clean up the voter rolls. And so that's essential. And the same day voting is a way that they get away with a lot of fraud. People are able to vote in multiple jurisdictions. We just need to close that loophole.
So number 4, require the publication of a list of all eligible voters Oh, we already did that one, didn't we? No, we didn't.
It's
Very similar.
require registration and then publish the list. Yes, sir.
So yeah, require voter registration. We talked about that. So require the publication of a list of all eligible voters by congressional district and voting precinct 30 days prior to federal election. So you're saying the number three was require the voter registration by a certain time, but this is public to I guess publicize a list. Is what you're
Well,
saying?
it's making that list of eligible voters accessible to the public.
Okay, that's interesting. That's actually, um, I would say that our voter registration is accessible to the public now. Either through the Secretary of State's office or sometimes the party does that, where you can get a copy of the voter registration list. How accurate it is a whole other story, but but or
And how does that work if they don't clean up the voter rolls? And if some places have same day registration, so election day is November 3rd or November 8th. People come in and register, and then before the end of November, they clean those people out. So it never hits that published list that's published, let's say, on the first or the end of every month.
So let
That,
me let me let me say this before we go to number five. So basically, if you publicize the list and you have it on a website that's more accessible, we'll say, so people don't have to go buy a list or pay the Secretary of State to get the list. If the list is more accessible, so anybody going along, go, hey, you know what? I'm gonna go on my street. Because I did a video where I said that we need more citizen activists to go out and canvass neighborhoods, find out where the bad registrations are, work with their local clerk of court to get those bad registrations removed. That was one way, that an idea that I came up with to positively get involved in cleaning up our elections. But that requires work going out and canvassing and knocking on doors with the voter registration list. Your idea, number four, if that list was made public on a website, automatically anybody could go in on this, and say, hey, let me see, oh, wait, here's Bob on my street. He moved 20 years ago.
that's right.
Wait, Jane died 30 years ago. Why is she still on this list? So you're saying that making it public could get more people active in cleaning up the rolls easier.
Well, theoretically, the lists are public, but sometimes the lists aren't public at the right time. Like when you're doing canvassing after the horse is out of the barn and the fraud's been committed, that's what they use against us is the difficulty in getting anything done after the fact. So,
all right,
that would tighten up a lot of stuff, William.
So number five, require in-person voting on federal election day with no early voting and very limited absentee voting. Ooh, Dan, that's rough. That's rough. I'm telling you, man. The Democrats aren't going to like that one.
You have to look at the whole plan. We'll get to a couple things down the line there in later steps or elements of election integrity.
Okay.
But basically, if we're not voting on election day, we have chain of custody problems. We have all kinds of problems, and you can look at all the ways that the election system is broken, and they have all kinds of reasons and excuses to extend it, to have early voting, and then absentee voting, limited absentee voting. You'll get down to if you take that for the moment at face value, then we can talk about the way that we would absentee vote that would be airtight.
All right.
Or the voting on election day, if somebody's got an excuse or the left is always going to use their bleeding heart reasons why some folks can't get out to the polls and whatever reason they have. But when Jesus was preaching in a room and some guys are trying to get their friend to him to heal him, the crowd was too great, so they took the thatches off the thatch roof. You remember that?
No, I don't remember this.
And they lowered him down so that Jesus could heal him. And so Jesus knew this was happening, and he rewarded their diligent effort by healing the guy. It wasn't like he would say, "Oh, open up a path right there and let Isaac through." So, there's too much. There are too many things that the left uses to open up opportunities for election fraud, and we
All
just
right.
have to close those down.
You're closing them up. All right, I'm getting you quick here.
Okay.
Absentee voters cast their ballots in person at authorized polling locations that forward absentee ballots by secure courier to appropriate congressional districts. Man, Dan, you're rough.
Well, so if somebody wants to get an absentee ballot, they get it, and then they cast it at a precinct where they are. They don't
Okay.
have to cast it early. They don't have to mail it in, and each precinct, precincts average about 1,100 votes ballots per precinct. And it's very easy to count at that level when you grab you roll them all up into millions of cast votes or hundreds of thousands of complex ballots. These machines have to be used. So if somebody's going to get an absentee ballot, cast it wherever you are.
So, but the problem is that the precincts aren't open on except on election day, most of them. And if they're going to be absent, how can they vote on absent if they're going to? Why cast an absentee vote if they are going to be there to cast the vote in person?
Well, first you limit absentee ballot opportunities. So take a military base. Our folks that are serving the military could have a precinct at their base, and they cast their ballots at their base, and then they get forwarded to the appropriate congressional districts.
I would add to that, maybe bring to their local clerk of court.
Pardon me?
That they could bring their absentee ballots to their local clerk of court in person, instead of trying to bring it into the precinct that's on the day. That's usually only open on the day that election day is.
No, here's how it works, William. If I got an absentee ballot and I am registered to vote in my precinct where I live, and I know I'm going to be out of town on government business or whatever, I would get my 3 ballots, red, white, and blue pieces of paper. I would have those in my possession. I would go, if I was in Texas, I'd go to any precinct in Texas. And it's really easy to find election precincts because they're all over the place, or they used to be, they should be. And so I would show up and I'd say, "Hey, I'm Dan. Here's a piece of paper that says I've got an absentee ballot from my jurisdiction, 4th District of South Carolina." And they're prepared to walk me through their process where they watch me put my thumbprint on the back of the ballot. I go into the voting booth, I cast my ballot, I put it into an envelope that's been provided to me that's addressed to the 4th District.
Mm-hmm.
And then I surrender that sealed ballot envelope to the election workers at that precinct, wherever I may be. So it's been made public that I'm an absentee voter. On the registration, at some point, we know who the absentee voters are. And all of those absentee voters would vote on election day at the most convenient precinct that they're
for brevity purposes, but I want to make sure I asked you the right question though, is if they're going to vote absentee and they're going to bring it to their precinct on election day, they can't do that if they're going to be absent.
No, the point is, William, they don't bring their absentee ballot to their precinct. They take their absentee ballot to any precinct anywhere in the United States. And those precincts are all prepared to receive a ballot from me. They record it that they received. A voting precinct will record how many votes have come through and who they were. And they have little old me show up at a precinct in Texas, and I've got my envelope addressed to the 4th District. I've got my ballots.
So how does that work? So how does that work if you're in another state and you bring it to a Texas one? They have to forward your vote back to your home state?
Absolutely. So Texas would report that they have so many ballots from the 4th District of South Carolina, and you just establish a secure way for those ballots to move from the precinct to the appropriate congressional district.
Okay, I'm gonna stop you there so we move to the next one.
Yes, sir.
I gotta tell you though, Dan, up front, and just I don't know that I agree on that one as much, but that's for another time as we work on that one later.
That's what civil
Seven,
discourse is for, brother.
what's that?
I said that's what civil discourse is for, brother.
Exactly right. So that's another one for another time. Seven is voter identity and eligibility is confirmed for each voter at the polling location by photographic ID and fingerprint or by other biometric means if the voter has no fingers. Okay. All right.
So you show up at your precinct,
Yep.
you present yourself, your photo ID.
It's an easy one. Yeah.
They have a thumbprint scanner. They already know you are associated with your thumbprint. They say that's you, and then your next station you go to would be where you pick up your ballots, red, white, and blue. If they're you're always going to have a white ballot for Congress.
Well, this
and
one,
a red ballot for Senate, and a blue ballot for president. So some elections you'll have just one ballot.
so basically that one is just a repeat of the one up above it. You just added ID.
I'm not sure.
Earlier we said number 2 was use fingerprints or biometric means to confirm the legal status of all persons in the United States, and then number 8, and then of course number 7 was confirm the eligibility by photographic ID and fingerprints or by the biometric means. So I get that the difference is ID there, but let's go to number 8.
So just to clarify, that the first step is legal status. The second step is getting registered to vote. Not everybody would be registered to vote. And the third step is showing up on election day at your assigned voting precinct and identify yourself with your photo ID and your thumbprint. And then they say, yes, that's you, William Wallace. Here are your ballots.
All right. Number 8, voters cast one paper ballot for each race on a federal election, white for a congressional race, pink for a Senate race, and light blue for a presidential race.
So with the federal election sequestered from all other elections, there are only up to 3 decisions to be made.
Okay.
And those decisions can be placed on separate pieces of paper. That you would not require different languages for ballots because a person's name is a person's name. You're voting for William Wallace, or you're voting for Dan Albert, or you're voting for Donald J. Trump. And you just have a very simple process where each ballot is easy to mark, and you put your thumbprint on the back of the ballot, and then you put your ballots into the ballot box.
Well, and I guess what we need to talk about later on another time when we devolve or kind of go into more detail on these is a lot of places combine elections because of cost on how much an election actually costs to put on the community by hiring because you have to pay the election workers and everything like that. But that's for another time. Number 9, voters affix their thumbprint or fingerprint to the back of each ballot prior to entering the voting booth.
So they pick up their ballots, they step to the next table, and when I'm trying to devise a mock election process where we could use a self-inking thumbprint stamp that they could use just for illustration purposes. But in a real election, you'd ink your thumb and you'd put your thumbprint on the back of each ballot, and then wipe off your thumb with a Kleenex. And then, like the Iraqis, were so proud of being able to vote, they held up their thumbs,
All right, so we got number 10. The population for each election precinct is limited to 5,000 citizens.
And that's to keep things simple and easy to count and local and easy and where you can be very transparent in the process. You have people that know each other. And when you're vetting people, you know that so-and-so doesn't have 20 people at their apartment. And so when you have 5,000 citizens, it used to be, William, that precincts were always, small like that. 1,000 to 1,500 would be the average. And that's just an arbitrary number. 5,
so basically you're saying that precincts nationwide should just be around that average of 1,100 instead of, well, I say average, be at around 1,100 instead of that number being the average, where you've got some precincts of 500, just basically level it all out, right?
Well, if the maximum population size is 5,000, you'll have precincts with a population of 1,000 people that might have 300 or 400 voters, and that's okay. That's the way it's. Dixville Notch, they're the first one to report their 8 votes every presidential
Right.
election.
So basically, we need to get them down. We need to get those the precinct numbers down as long as they're not over 5,000. 11 is ballots are sorted, counted, and reported at each election precinct on election night after polls close. Isn't that done already?
Well, it's not done with integrity. We don't have paper ballots. If you have
Okay.
3 ballot colors, they could be easily sorted into 3 different tables, and then those ballots could, and you have color to sort, so that makes
Right.
it really easy.
Right.
And then you have,
And my question, and the reason I'm saying these things isn't to challenge you personally as much as I know that other listeners might say, "Hey, aren't they doing that already?" And by asking you and getting the clarification, we're getting more details that shows why it's different than just what comes to your mind in the first thought. Um, so number 12 is elections. Let's see, because that was number 11. 12 elections at each precinct are conducted with full transparency with live stream video and the opportunity for the public to observe the voting and counting process from the perimeter of the voting area.
so the idea is, imagine two rows of stanchions that separate the voting area from the observation area, and then you enter at one end and you check in, you get your ballot, you affix your thumbprint, you cast your ballot, and you put it into a ballot box. And then at the end of the polling hours, those ballots could be sorted and counted in probably no more than 3 hours.
Okay. 13, require the publication of a list of all actual voters by congressional district and voting precinct within 3 days of a federal election. Are you saying, first thing that comes to my mind is, are you saying that, everybody who voted gets publicized, that, hey, these are the people that voted in this last election?
No, it's not a matter of publicity. It's a matter of having a registration of voters that are eligible, and that should be public. And then after the election, you ought to be able to have that same registration of voters with an indication of who voted, so that the public could then vet that list as well. Because if they know that Aunt Sally she died already, or she's on vacation and she didn't vote or whatever, I mean, there are just different ways that people commit fraud. So we have
So
to tighten up every
I,
opportunity.
Yeah, I'm kind of liking I'm kind of liking this idea though, Dan, that if you've got a voter registration online, easy accessible before the election, here's our registered voters that are eligible to vote for this election, and then the election takes place, whether machines are used or not. In this case, machines would be used to count the votes, although they're done with a hand ballot. I get that, but there's going to be there's going to be some digital process to where afterwards you can look on that same registration and say, okay, here are those people that voted in this last election. So anybody could go on and say, hey, I noticed that Bob died last year. He's on the election list 30 days before, but I see that Bob voted, on this day. Somebody can sound the alarm by simply monitoring a list that was publicized afterwards. Is that right?
Yes, and some people are going to freak out with this idea of having a centralized database with a thumbprint. But back when we were born, we had the Bureau of Vital Statistics that had you have footprint, thumbprint. Sometimes you've got your name, your gender, your place of birth, your parents. So all I'm talking about is having and we can't trust the government on everything, on anything. We know that, but we have to have election integrity. If we had this centralized database, then we would be able to put the onus on each individual to properly register wherever they move to instead of having to clean up any list. So when they do that registration at the new location, it automatically voids their registration at their prior location, and people wouldn't be able to vote in multiple jurisdictions, which is a problem.
But I think they already have that now, a centralized counting system, don't they?
I'm not talking about a counting system. The counting of votes has to be done by hand on election day after the polls.
But they have a centralized database right now that where everybody's registration is already collected right now.
Well, I don't think that's centralized. I think that's done by state, and some states are intentionally lax in cleaning up their voting rolls so that they can mail ballots to what you have happening is tacit collusion. You have people that are, without talking to each other, a post office worker ditches ballots on the way to the post office because he knows he just got a bunch of Republican ballots from a neighborhood he knows is Republican. People found discarded ballots, and you have people that will commit this fraud without having to communicate with anyone else. They get a ballot in the mail at their place, and then they all of a sudden they get a ballot they can cast. Some people are going to do that. Some are honest and won't.
All right. So number 14, require the storage of ballots by precinct for 1 year in a storage facility for each congressional district.
I would modify that to 22 months, which is federal law at this point. And okay. What I envision, Bill, is that these ballots, every precinct could store their ballots in 1 or 2 baker's boxes for a file box, something of that size. So every precinct, after counting the ballots under a very transparent process with people able to see it happening, they've reported it, so it can't change. The ballots have to be reported. And right now there's so many shenanigans. Jurisdictions don't know how many ballots are left. That's ridiculous when that happens.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
You have every precinct is responsible for their ballots. And then those ballots never leave the congressional district. They leave the precinct and go right to a storage room that would probably be no bigger than 20 by 20. It could be secured by the local sheriff, or there needs to be security for those ballots, because if they have to be audited, there's a way to do that in a very sensible way.
Okay. So number 15 requires our last one. How you like that? Require severe criminal penalty for any intentional matching of the identity of the fingerprint. Boy, you are really on this fingerprint thing, Dan. Require severe criminal penalty for any intentional matching of the identity of the voter fingerprint on the back of a ballot with the vote cast on the front.
So if people go through and attach their thumbprint to the back of a ballot and they cast their vote on the front, and those ballots are counted and they're stored and they never come close to a machine, then the secret ballot is as secure as it can be. And so people are going to have an issue with a thumbprint, and they're going to have an issue with the the secret ballot. I understand that.
Well, I'm looking through your book here. You talk a little bit about to preempt after this. You talk about preempting the Great Reset. Looks like you're talking also about, let's see, breaking up the big tech cartel, breaking up the Wall Street cartel. You talk about decoupling from China. You talk about free market healthcare. There's a lot of things in here that I think that people, let's see, right to work amendment and to restore limited government. There's a lot of things that in here afterwards that you talk about that's freedom and liberty oriented. Dan, it sounds to me like this is more of a book of getting involved, finding some other. So these are some these 15 ideas that you have on restoring our election. Some of them are really unique. Haven't heard them before. Haven't heard Tom talked about before. Some are unique in a way. Some, I gotta say, even I can scratch my head a little bit and go, yeah, but the uncomfort of it, or the, I don't want to say disagreement that I have with a couple of the things in there, I would say more of the uncomfort with some of the ideas in there, I think opens up discussions that may be able to lead to solutions to some of the problems that those are trying to take care of. And then the rest of your book talks about things just to get people involved and woken up in America.
Well, and the rest of the book primarily is fleshing out the bold ideas. Like this plan is bold, comprehensive, and transformational, and we need that or one of a plan of similar magnitude and direction. And problem solution. That's the approach I took, and the I encourage civil discourse with all of these ideas, because the election integrity, those 15 elements. There are other plans that may present a ballot with serial numbers on it. That has its own complexities and difficulties implementing. So, we're in the marketplace of ideas, and I stand by what I've written and would entertain and welcome civil discourse with anybody from any persuasion.
Well, I wouldn't call my slight disagreement with a couple things civil discourse. I would say that they are ideas that would spark some conversation. I think that they are the great foundation. So some of the ones I disagree, not so much disagree with, but have question about are a good foundation or a starting place that could spark some really good ideas. And we'll talk more about that later as we really evolve and talk about some of these things a little bit more. It's not a disagreement. It's simply that a couple of the ideas, like there was the one about I know the one in particular was that if you have an absentee ballot, let's say you live in South Carolina and you're going to be on vacation in Texas, and you take your ballot with you and bring it to a precinct in Texas, and it gets reported in South Carolina. That one I think is a little tough. I get the concept, but that one's a little tough, I think.
Well, I say limit absentee ballots. So if you're going on vacation, it's like Christmas. If you go on vacation, Christmas with the Cranks or whatever they're, Tim Allen. I mean, if you skip election day and you're on vacation and you make a choice not to vote, that's your business.
Right.
But I'm saying limit the opportunities for absentee ballots. And then there's a way to handle that so that those are cast on election day with complete integrity. That's the key.
Well, and right now it's where you can bring you can bring it to a clerk of court, or your county commissioner before you leave, and have them store and hold your vote and still report it on election day. So
you have chain of custody issues with that. You have information comes out on a candidate on the day before the election that you didn't know. There are all kinds of reasons. Like we could look at, and later we'll flesh out all of the, the leftists will scream and they'll be weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. What I want to do, Bill, is create a mock election that demonstrates just how easy this would be, how simple the process is and how easy it is to count all those ballots and know exactly what the results are. So it's one of the problems we have is, election day is no longer election day, and election night, we don't know the winners, and that's by design. That's part of their fraud. And we can shut that down. It's going to take the clamoring of millions and millions of people to get on the same page. And that's kind of the mission that I'm on. And appreciate the opportunity to flesh it out with you.
Absolutely. Dan, any final thoughts there before we end up?
Well, like I said before, we're in the midst of a Marxist coup. And if we don't have election integrity, we're a banana republic. And they are determined to not allow us to have election integrity. So we have to get serious about this. And there are 5 states where this could happen very easily. And what I'd like to do, Bill, is I've mentioned having these a mock election that could bolt on to any meeting of sufficient size where you could run this election no more than 1,500 ballots. If there are 10,000 people at a Trump rally, we just need up to 1,500 to demonstrate how this works. And the beauty of it I think it would drop a lot of jaws. And people hopefully would say, yeah, let's do this.
Well, let's try to find somebody who will do a mock election with you and figure that out.
Yes, sir.
Dan, I want to thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you, William Wallace. I do my my Scottish accent, but I don't have one.
Yeah.
I'm only a quarter Scottish, so half Scots Irish, but I still, it's like
Well, I'm
I
sure you're
love the
wearing
accent.
I'm sure you're wearing your kilt right now, but we don't need to see that.
Oh, you don't
So,
want to see it? I've got a couple of copies of Braveheart here I could find somewhere.
I love it. I
But,
love it.
yeah.
Well, Dan, I'm in the
Take care.
broadcast, and I'm going to talk to you offline for just a minute. But thank
All
you
right.
so much, and I would like for everybody to share the content, share the interview. You'll find it on William Wallace for America on all podcast apps, and also on Rumble, and of course you can share it here on Facebook and on CloudHub. Thank you all so much, and have a great day.
Thank you, William.